We are back with episode number 7 of the SEC Football Hour. I'm Chase Robinson. That's Chris Lee. We're going to spend the next little bit talking some SEC football here on Southeastern 16 as we get closer to the season getting underway. I mean, it's mid-July as we're doing this. SEC Media Days going on out in Dallas, Texas. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But before we get into all that, let's talk about Bet Online. They bring you all of our great content here on Southeastern 16. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet of up to $250 for your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics to baseball to Formula One racing. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, unwind with one of the over 150 slots games. Head over to the website to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Again, that is promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV. Bet online, the game starts here. Chris, how are you?
Chase, I'm great. It's always one of the most fun things I do every week when you and I get together to do this show. I feel like we've hit a turning point in the offseason. Anytime SEC Media Day is underway, then you know that you're getting close. You're just a couple of weeks open or away from the opening of fall camp, and we could start having new storylines instead of the ones we've recycled for 6 months. And so I
Yes.
always look forward to this time of the year and happy to be on with you again.
Yeah, SEC Media Days happening out in Dallas, Texas this year. We're not there, but we've been watching. We've been keeping our eye out on things happening out in Dallas as the coaches are speaking. Commissioner Greg Sankey is speaking. Anything that you've seen that has stuck out to you while watching the SEC Media Days coverage this week?
Well, let me let our audience in on a little secret. You and I have been to SEC Media Days before. I've been multiple times over a span of several years, and most of us who've done this a long time, the texts and the conversations we have are basically this is a huge waste of time for the most part. Now, you do learn some new things. You do pick up on some things. You have a chance to augment your knowledge. But if you do your homework, you really don't learn a lot of new things at media days. So I think that's one of my takeaways. I always look forward to it as a way to see guys that I only see at that event once a year, or people whose radio shows I've done before and never met, or or eat the food, which is usually pretty good, something like that. But in terms of a learning thing, for the most part, if you're really dialed in to college football in the SEC, you don't pick up a lot of new stuff at media days unless it is something that has just really happened within the last few days.
Yeah, and it's a lot of the same thing from all the coaches. They're not going to give away too much. I certainly agree with you there. It's always been a great event to see friends in the media and things like that. And the first time it's not been in the state of Alabama, Georgia, or Tennessee. Last year it was
Mm-hmm.
Nashville for the first time. It's been in Atlanta. I really liked it when it was in Hoover, not far from where I was for many years, but this year out in Dallas, Texas, obviously we're not there. But I'm interested to see kind of the feedback they get from having that in Dallas.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be in Dallas a lot. It's not very centrally located, but I know why they did it. It feels like the fair thing to do. Um, Maybe get some of that into the country, a little more used to the rest of the SEC, give those teams their moment to shine. I think they deserved it, so I have no issue with it, but I don't think that's going to – I don't know. Maybe it will be. Maybe they will rotate it between Nashville and Dallas and Birmingham. Who knows? We'll wait and see. But, yeah, I think this time it's defensible, certainly, that they did it there.
Yeah, next year they've already announced it. We'll be back in Atlanta at the College Football Hall of
Good.
Fame next July. But one thing, Chris, that has stood out to me just watching it, and we've talked about it, is Nick Saban. He's been added
Yeah.
to ESPN. He'll be an analyst in the fall, but he's been on the SEC Network coverage, and he's added a lot. He has added a lot to me to their to the SEC Media Days coverage.
Chase, you and I, every week you assemble an agenda and you say these are the 5 or 6 talking points and find something to add your thoughts here. And we never know what the other person is going to say. But the three things I had written down: one, media days are overrated. We just went through that. Number two on my list of things was Nick Saban. I think this has been, and I have not, has for full disclosure, I've not been able to watch as much this year. I'm just getting back on vacation. We had the SEC draft. If people don't know, we have a baseball show every week, and we really went over the draft with a fine tooth comb. So we're doing our team previews. We did Oklahoma this morning. I got a lot going on. So I've got this thing on in the background much of my day. I'm not as dialed in. But when I have been dialed in, Nick Saban is appointment TV. He is the best addition to media days. I don't know. He may be the best thing that ever happened to media days. He's been that
Yep.
good when I've heard him speak.
Yeah, he's been really good. He provides a lot to their coverage, and he we're not used to hearing him talk about anything other than Alabama. I mean, he was the head
Yeah.
coach at Alabama for 17 years. We've been used to just hearing him talk about Alabama, and so it's been interesting to get his thoughts on other teams, other coaches, and that type of thing. He made his SEC championship prediction, and it did not include Alabama. Georgia and
Oh,
Texas is who
yeah.
he believes will play in the SEC championship. So I thought that was interesting from a guy who knows the team very well. Obviously, it's a much different team now after he left. But another thing that he said on Monday in their coverage that has gotten a lot of people talking, and I want to read the quote to you, Chris, and then I want to get your thoughts on kind of what you think his approach to this was. Obviously, some of the SEC, doesn't like how he said this, and some are fine with it. So here's a quote from Nick Saban from SEC Media Days. He says, "What kind of tickles me is all these people asking questions about how Texas always ran the conference they were in. They're not going to run the SEC. There's a whole lot of arrogant people in a lot of places in the SEC. Forget about all that. They'll be a good team and a great program, and Sark will do a great job, but that's not going to happen." That
Well, for
was Nick Saban.
starters, is a math equation. Texas makes up 1/16th of this league. It made up 1/12th of the one that it was in last. So that's number one. Number two, I think most of the teams, and not to take a shot at any teams in any other conference, but I mean, Texas is joining some brands: Alabama, Georgia, Florida, LSU, Tennessee. I mean, we could go on and on. That was a conference where you were in there with Baylor and Kansas State, and probably the biggest other fish in the pond just came with you. That's Oklahoma. So I think he's right. I don't think that Texas is also the new guy on the block. Now look, we just saw Texas steal a baseball coach under questionable circumstances in the College World Series from a member school and its arch rival. So if I'm Greg Sankey, I'm not real happy about the way that went down. And maybe that's some of what has annoyed people about Texas over the years. But I think Nick Saban's right for the reasons I outlined, and probably several he could add.
Yeah, yeah, and I did not have a problem with him saying that. I think he wasn't meaning it as something derogatory to
Yeah.
Texas by any means. Just the fact that this is a new league, this is a tough league, and there's not really any team who runs it per se. I mean, his Alabama teams did for a few years,
Yeah.
but now it's somebody else. Now it's Georgia, who kind of everybody views as the top of the SEC. So I didn't have a problem necessarily with his comments there. But he has been a great addition there to the SEC Media Days coverage, and you can tell he's in his retirement. He's relaxed, and he's a very good football analyst.
Yeah, I would. Unfortunately, don't make me pay to hear Nick Saban speak, but I think I would consider paying. Like, if you could bottle this up every week, and have him on what, because we've never heard him outside of his very tightly controlled environment where his focus was on one team. He got annoyed when you asked him for the most part about other things. Now you get to see him kind of unfiltered. You get to see the side that people have told you that was there. It was like Snuffleupagus and Sesame Street. You didn't, or whoever, well, like you never, if you didn't see it, it was hard to believe it, but now you get to see
Yeah,
it. And yeah,
yeah,
it's
it's
been
good.
great.
It is. So, again, SEC Network has done a great job of covering SEC media days and yeah, some good stuff coming out of Dallas this week. So we are going to have a great conversation in just a little bit with Kelley Ford, kfordratings.com. We'll dive into that in just a little bit. Looking forward to having him on. But we've been doing some rankings ourselves here on the show. We've ranked offenses, we've ranked defenses, we've ranked head coaches. Today, Chris, we are going to rank our top 5 offensive line units. And so both of us we don't know each other's list, but we have looked in depth at teams' offensive lines. So we are going to rank our top 5 offensive line units in the SEC. So as we typically do, we'll start with 5 and work our way down to 1. So Chris, I'll go first here with my number 5, and I've got the Ole Miss Rebels as my number 5 offensive line unit. They were decent last year. They have 3 guys back though, but they don't only have 3 guys back. They add 2 starters, one from Washington and one from North Carolina, and they added some more guys too. But I think uh, those will be 2 of the starters. A combined 222 starts among the offensive line. I think there's a lot of experience, and I think they've worked to have a really good offensive line this year because of the quarterback situation. Jackson Dart is primed to have a really good year, and they're really going to have primed to have a really good year offensively. So I've got Ole Miss as my number 5 offensive line.
Yeah, that's a very defensible pick. I think that they've got the 3 guys that return, I think, have played a lot of ball together. I'll just give you a little outline of my thinking when we did this, Chase. I had a top 4 that was pretty clear. It was just what order do I put them in? And then that 5th team, I had 3 teams to choose from, and it was a hard decision. Ole Miss was one of the teams on my list. Ole Miss did not make the list. I think that says more about the rest of the league than it does Ole Miss.
Yeah. And again, I had that same. I went back and forth looking at numbers and looking at guys on this. Who was your number 5, Chris?
My number 5 was the Tennessee Volunteers, and
Okay.
I look at a lot of things. I look at star power and experience, and Tennessee has got a couple of all-star candidates. You're seeing center Cade Mays, who I think is a class of 2020 guy. It's always good to have experience at that center position. He is getting on some preseason All-American lists. They added Lance Hurd on the left side. He was a kid that any other school but LSU would probably be starting this year, but LSU, which, spoiler alert, will come up later in the list, had a couple of American tackles. So Lance Hurd, who was almost a consensus 5-star recruit, now going to be manning the left tackle position at LSU. Some other guys on that line. John Campbell, their right tackle now, was their left tackle a year ago. Always good when you move your left tackle to right tackle. It means you've upgraded. And Javontes Spraggins at right guard played about 700 snaps last year, started 11 times. And the Creek kid at left guard has also played a lot between Tennessee and Georgia. Talented kid. I think this is the team that's got the backups or some guys that have been there before and played. And so that's why the Vols made my list at number 5.
Yeah, and they were close on mine. I mean, I definitely consider them based off. I mean, last year I mean, they did not allow many sacks. I don't have the number in front of me, but they were rock solid the last year too. And so yeah, I think Tennessee's a good pick there at number 5. So moving to number 4, I've got the Alabama Crimson Tide at number 4. My offensive line unit rankings. And you add Parker Brailsford, who's transferred in from Washington. We'll see what he can do. A lot of good talk around him, and he was not there for the spring, so it's kind of hard to. We haven't really seen him play. But then you think guys like Tyler Booker. I saw him at SEC Media Days when I was watching it, and he had a lot of good things to say about the unit. And then Caden Proctor, who he had transferred out to Iowa, but has ended back up in Tuscaloosa. You got Elijah Pritchett. I mean, I think this is a very solid offensive line for Alabama. Now, you think back to years past, and when you thought it was going to be a good old line for the Tide, and they had issues that they had to work out.
Yeah.
But I think this line that they have this year is going to be the best we've seen at Alabama in a while.
Yeah, Alabama was also my number 4, Chase. Brailsford is a kid who is showing up as a lot of people's first team All-American center, of course, reunited with his old coach who put together maybe, or I think what was considered the best offensive line in the country last year at Washington. Booker at left guard. I've seen him on some All-American teams, not necessarily first team, maybe second, third, fourth team. Even if you're a fourth team All-American, Chase, that's going to put you basically in the top 3 or 4% of offensive linemen at your position in the country. So that's significant. I don't get too hung up on that. And
Yeah.
then, of course, Proctor at left tackle. I've seen him on some preseason All SEC lists. So, yeah, the right side of the line is where they're a little shaky by comparison. Jaden Roberts, Elijah Pritchett. Pritchett played 13 games last year. Roberts started 8 times. So it's not like they're bereft of talent and experience there. Hard to argue with what Alabama's got.
Yeah, that's why, and I agree with you there. That's why I guess we both have them there at number 4. Moving to number 3, I have got the LSU Tigers. So you think about some guys there on the line. Will Campbell, Emory Jones Jr., I think are going to be, two names that you're going to hear a lot when it comes to offensive lines this year. Um, I think they're going to cause all kinds of problems, and that's
Yeah.
just 2 guys on a very big line. And so I think LSU, we know what they have in quarterback and skill guys, but I think what they have back at offensive line and the guys that they've added and have stepped up, I think this is going to be. I think the offensive line can definitely help them reach things that maybe go deep, reach the playoffs. That's what kind of team we're talking about here. They're kind of borderline right now, but I think this offensive line. And those 2 guys, especially Jones and Campbell. Then you got a guy, other guys as well. Garrett Dillinger, one of those that I think is shaping up this LSU offensive line to be really good.
Yeah, Dellinger started 4 games for them last year, played 12 at left guard. Miles Frazier, the right guard, started all 13 times. They've got a new center, DJ Chester, who's relatively inexperienced. But I mean, look, this is like everything else in SEC football, it's a beauty contest. Like if you start and say you've got All-American candidates at your left and right tackle, and oh, by the way, both guys that are probably going to be first round picks, like would that not usually be an automatic number 1 in most leagues? Not in this one.
Yeah.
And that tells you a lot about what's ahead.
Yeah. So, I've got LSU number 3 there. Who's your number 3?
My number 3 is LSU.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yes. Hey, we got 2 of the same so far. This doesn't happen a lot that we have the same. We have 2 of the same so far. So
Yeah.
number 2, I've got the Georgia Bulldogs. So
Okay.
they lost some guys off of the line, specifically to the NFL. But I think they've reloaded really nicely. And you got some guys. You got left tackle Ernest Green, right tackle Xavier Truss, that are 2 guys who are going to hold it down there. And then also Tate Rutledge is a guy that a lot of folks are talking about out of Athens as well. So I think they've got a bunch of guys again who they're going to lose to the NFL. That's just how big and good they are up front right now. So I've got Georgia as my number 2.
I have Georgia as my number 1 and Texas as my number 2. And I don't want to spoil your rankings, but like, come on, at this point, if you're paying attention,
Yeah.
you know that Texas is going to be Chase's number 1. I don't know, but I mean, if not, then we've had an alien invasion in your house or something, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I mean, and this is I say that in good fun, but this is how I sort of narrowed it down. Okay. Texas's offensive line, and I want to say Lindy's ranked Texas's offensive line number 1. And I think Texas was a Joe Moore semifinalist last year for the best offense in the country. 9 of the 10 guys on their 2 deep back, including I think Well, Cameron Williams, their starter at right tackle, played 9 times a year ago, one start, but was at Texas. So a lot of familiarity with the system. Kelvin Banks Jr., their left tackle, is getting All-American run in some places. The left side of their line, Jake Majors and Hayden Connor, both guys are getting some All-SEC publicity. But I went Georgia because, Chase, listen to this, okay? 4 of their 5 guys I have seen on somebody's All-American team. Ernest Green III, their left tackle, Dylan Fairchild, their left guard, Taylor Ratledge, their right guard, who's been there forever, and Xavier Trust, their right tackle. I have seen them listed all on a reputable publications All-American team somewhere. I to me, I will trust the people that watch those things and make the decisions more than my own. And it's, let's face it, it's hard to watch 5 guys at once and to do
Yeah.
that over 16 teams. But that was pretty impressive. I'm like, they've got a history of doing this. They got talent. Their backups are, 4 and 5-star recruits for the most part. And most of those guys have had experience. 8 of Georgia's top 10 guys on the 2 deep that I've assembled were at Georgia last year. Their recruits are always top notch. They got 2 freshmen coming in that'll back up at right guard and right tackle. So to me, that was the deciding factor in making Georgia number 1.
Yeah, and that's fair. That's a good I think that's a good argument there, and I certainly agree with. I mean, it's a. I went back and forth on who should be 2 and 1. I just see so much in Texas.
Yeah.
The fact that they have 4 starters back from a really good offensive line last year, 121 career starts overall on the line. Like they've played a lot of football. They've played a lot of snaps. And, you think about some of the guys that are down there. I mean, this may be the best offensive line Steve Sarkisian's ever had. And you look at the play of the quarterback and the guys he has around. That whole combination is very dangerous because he is a very creative
Yeah.
offensive mind. But I think definitely this is the best offensive line that Sark has had, especially in his time at Texas. But I think they're going to dominate some folks. So I'm looking forward to seeing the big guys up front.
Well, Chase, it's funny. Phil Steele took the cop out. He tied Georgia and Texas at 1 in his rankings. And here's another thing. I don't know if you notice this. Phil Steele ranked Alabama's offensive line 9th.
Wow.
I can only guess that was a typo because he's got Bradsford and Booker as first team All SEC guys, and we haven't even accounted for Caden Proctor yet. So I'm guessing that had to be a typo.
Yeah, it must have had to been. But those are our top 5 offensive line units in the SEC coming up in 2024. So we'll continue to rank different units as we get ready for the 2024 season. Mentioned earlier, Kelley Ford, kfordratings.com joins us as we're gonna get into the weeds of some of how he, and I know Chris, you're really into this stuff, into the analytics side and the numbers, and man, Kelley has it going on.
He does. Great interview with Kelley, and really enjoyed it, and I think our audience will too.
Yeah, so here it is, Kelley Ford, kfordratings.com. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation right here. We welcome on Kelley Ford with k4ratings.com. And I was diving into this. I came across Kelley on Twitter. I went to the website. I started looking through this. I was really intrigued. And so I'm looking forward to spending some time with Kelley talking through this. But again, K4 rankings or rating, excuse me, k4ratings.com is where you can check this out. But Kelley, really appreciate you taking a few minutes with us today, talking some SEC football.
Absolutely, Chase. Thanks for having me. It's going to be a fun conversation. I already know it.
Yeah, and so right off the bat, let's talk kfordratings.com. Where did this come from? I mean, it's a whole formula that you have to do this. So tell us a little about kind of how it got started, what you do, what the formula is. Give us kind of some background here on K Ford Ratings.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, to keep it simple and brief, College football has always been my favorite sport for literally as long as I can remember. The 2007 season was an amazing season that really put that over the top for me of like, okay, I don't think any sport can ever top what we just experienced here in college football in 2007. So from that moment on, it was really solidified as this is my favorite thing, and this is what I'm going to spend time doing. I've also, my whole life kind of had a knack for numbers and a strong background in math and in science, and so I was able to really marry those two things together with the K Ford power ratings, and then all the things that come along with that. So the power ratings, in a nutshell, very similar to Bill Connolly's SP Plus, Brian Fremeau's
Mhm.
FEI, ESPN FPI. Those are the power ratings that a lot of people are familiar with. The K Ford ratings are constructed in a very similar vein. So I'm looking in the preseason, which of course is where we are now, at three main things. What's your returning production? And I do capture transfers in returning production. What's your recent K Ford rating as a program? So how's your team been in my model the last couple of years? And then also, how well do you recruit in recent years out of the high school ranks as well? So the way that college football rosters are constructed in 2024 is very different than it was, 5 or 6 years ago when I started doing this publicly. So the weights of those three inputs have changed, I would say, fairly significantly in the time that I've been doing this. But that's how the preseason numbers come to be. And then once we get into the season, I phase out that preseason component and it gets replaced with the very, very informative in-season data. And that's when we really start to know. I mean, after 2 or 3 games, we really have a good handle on what these teams are, what they can be, and how these races, both in conference and for the CFP now, should be shaping up.
Kelly, if we have some time later, I'd like to get into the weeds just a little bit on how you put this together because I have a question or two. But before we do that, one thing that stands out to me, you got Georgia preseason #1. That's not a surprise. What is a surprise to me is coming off last year when there was so much parity. I don't think there was a lot of difference. I don't know what your rating show felt like. There wasn't a lot of difference in the top 8 teams. I mean, Ohio State and Georgia didn't make the playoff. And there's situations, but seeing Georgia not just at #1, but what is it? 4.5 points ahead of Ohio State at 2. That's a little bit eye popping. I mean, it wouldn't have been a few years ago when teams used to dominate, but coming off what we saw last year, that's impressive.
You're absolutely right, Chris, and that's really been my lead in talking about the preseason version 2 power ratings, which is what I have out right now with any conversation I'm having. So this one's no different. Georgia at 1 is not surprising, as you said. The gap between Georgia and the field, almost 4.5 points, more than 4, almost 4.5 points from Georgia at 1 to Ohio State at 2. That surprised me as well. And so when people talk about, Kelley, do you just trust the model blindly, wholeheartedly? I don't. No model is perfect, and I've talked about that on numerous occasions as well. However, the model has proven for the last 5 or 6 years to be pretty darn accurate and to be very reliable, engaging the relative strengths of teams relative to each other. So I do use it as a starting point. It gives us a good 30,000-foot view of any single team, of any conference, of the national landscape, and then we can drill down and debate, the finer points of here and there. So Georgia being 4 points ahead of the field surprised me. Kelley Ford, the person, not K Ford ratings, the model, and that's something that I'm very curious to keep an eye on here early in the season. Does Georgia maintain that gap? And if they do, for how long? I certainly don't think that gap's going to grow as the season goes. That would be even more surprising. But yeah, Georgia, from everything we're looking at, those three inputs that I talked about, and just really what we come to expect, it's not even accounting for, Chris, the chip that Georgia's going to have on their shoulder. And Georgia hasn't had a chip
Yeah.
on their shoulder in recent years.
No.
Well, they do now because they were left out last year, despite what my model and many out there would say them being one of the 4 best teams. Were they one of the 4 most deserving? That's the interesting conversation where the committee said no. My numbers actually lean towards no as well. But certainly this was one of the 4 best teams in the country last year, and they did not have a chance. Well, they did, and they failed in the SEC championship game. They did not have the opportunity in the playoff to defend that title. So it's a good team, highly motivated. If you're on Georgia's schedule this year, which is one of the most difficult in the country by my numbers, watch out because, yeah, Georgia, I expect them to be firing on all cylinders right out of the gate.
Yeah, and looking at just looking up and down your preseason rating version 2 here at the different SEC teams and where they're at, I'm really intrigued by Oklahoma being at #8. Chris and I have talked Oklahoma extensively on our channel. We like their roster. We like how the Sooners look. But 8 is higher than a lot of people I think would put them. and they have in their rating systems. What led to the Sooners being number 8?
You guys are incredibly astute because literally the top two things that stand out to me in my own top 10 are the gap for Georgia and the rest of the field and Oklahoma being at number 8. So you guys are right on the ball. You say
Mm.
what led to Oklahoma being where they are? Oklahoma was treated the same as the 133 other teams that are playing FBS football this year. The same three inputs is what led to Oklahoma having the rating that they have and every other team as well. So when you look at those three things that I talked about, Oklahoma, they have a top 15 defense by my numbers. It's a top 15 offense by my number as well. And the special teams, while that's not a huge piece of the puzzle, especially early in the season, I expect them to be improved because that was a major issue with Oklahoma last year. They'll be improved in that phase as well. So when you just look holistically at Oklahoma, they really don't have a weakness. And that's what the model is saying. I personally, if I was putting together, my own top 10, top 15, Oklahoma certainly would not be number 8 for me. But the
Yeah.
model likes what it sees from Oklahoma. Oklahoma plays a tough schedule this year. It's the number 6 most difficult schedule in the country by my numbers. If you look at just SEC play, so pull out all the non-conference games, it's the 3rd most difficult SEC conference schedule by my numbers. So Oklahoma, despite being, a top 10 team for me right now, their win total projection is 8. And I'll say only 8 because for a program like Oklahoma, although now in the SEC, do expectations change year in and year out, but 8-4 is most likely. 4-4 in conference play is a real possible outcome for this Oklahoma team this year, even though I have them power rated in the top 10. So the model really likes them. I personally have a few more reservations, but again, the model is my starting point. It's what we can use to start the conversation and then drill down as we have here in Oklahoma.
Kelly, here's another two that really pop off to me in the SEC: Florida and Auburn. You've got them both higher than most teams, but hey, we've been doing a lot of off-season content, and sometimes it takes a while to dig into somebody's roster. I was looking at Florida's and I was like, hey, wait a minute. Yeah, I think everybody's kind of buried Billy Napier. They've talked about that schedule. And when you get past that and start looking into the roster, what they've got, some of the skill spots, what they've got at quarterback with Graham Mertz. I was like, should we not be talking about maybe Florida's a little better than everybody thinks, rather than burying that program based on the most unforgiving schedule I might have ever seen?
I agree with you, Chris. I think people should be talking about Florida. I have a number 22 in the power ratings, as you noted, Auburn there at 23. But specific to Florida, the narrative has been about the schedule, and rightly so, because by my numbers, it is the most difficult schedule in the country. But much like Georgia being number 1 in the power ratings, it's not that Florida's number 1 that's surprising. I think people can expect that. It's the margin by which Florida has the most difficult schedule. If you
Yeah.
look through every team's schedule through a common lens, so I picked the number 12 power rated team, average top 25, number 12, however you want to term it. If you look at every single schedule through that lens, the number 12 team in the country, power rated team, would be expected to win a half game less over the course of 12 regular season games against Florida's schedule than the number 2 most difficult, which for me is Georgia. So Florida's schedule is so difficult, and it's so much more difficult than any other teams. That's what's getting the headlines. But you're right. If you drill down on this team, by my numbers, it should be the best team that Billy Napier's had in his 3 years there. This should be the best team that Florida's fielded just generally since the 2020 COVID year. And a lot of people like to throw that year out. I don't throw it out, but you can certainly discount it because it was what it was with the rules we were playing with and the no fans and all that. But this is the best team if you take out the COVID year since 2019 for Florida for me. The offense is going to be really good. I expect them to take a step forward this year in the top 30. But the defense, that's where I expect to see a big stride, because that's what struggled the last couple of years in Gainesville. The defense has been hovering around number 70 nationally. That's not good enough for Florida as a program, and that's not good enough to compete in the SEC. We know that. I've got this now as a top 50 unit, so making strides in the right direction. And I think this Florida team, for as tough as the schedule is, I do have a 10% chance that they can get to 8 wins in the regular season. And if they do, a lot of people don't think 8-4 is a playoff worthy record. I agree with you in most cases. If they do, I think Florida at 8-4 should be in the conversation for one of those at-large bids. I don't think the committee would actually pull the trigger and put them in, but 8-4 against this schedule is comparable to 9-3 against some, or even 10-2 against some other Power 4 conference team schedules.
Fortunately, fan bases are rational, and Florida fans will factor all that in, right?
Unfortunately, I'm not sure that's the case. But again, that's why I have the model. That's why I have the numbers to help provide context and what I call realistic expectations for teams.
Yeah.
Whether or not fans listen to that, fan short for fanatic, that's up for debate. But I think Florida, if they're 8-4, I mean, wow, that would be a huge reason to celebrate this year.
Yeah.
You got Missouri in your ratings there at number 15. A lot of folks have Missouri as a team knocking on the door of the playoff, a potential. They're at 15 on yours. What is it about this team there at Missouri that has them in this position there on your ratings?
So I think Missouri is going to be in that playoff conversation as well. So it's not just Kelley have it number 15. That's too low because some people have said that. If you look at the schedule that Missouri's playing, it's number 32 nationally when you incorporate all 12 games. That is the
Mhm.
easiest schedule of any SEC team. They're the only one outside the top 30 nationally. But if you also peel away the non-conference and look just at the SEC slate, it's the second easiest SEC schedule by my numbers. So it's all there for Missouri this year. By my numbers, this could be the best team we've seen at Missouri since maybe 2018 or even before. I mean, this could be the best team in more than 10 years in Columbia if things break right for this team. Also, you have the schedule set up in such a way that it's very manageable. I think this is a top 10 offense. I've got the defense around number 20, and there's only 2 games this year that my numbers currently make Missouri an underdog. That would be week 6 at Texas A&M. I've got a 38% win expectancy, and week 9 at Alabama. That's a 22% win expectancy. Outside of those 2 games, right now, Missouri has greater than a 50% chance to win each individual game. I think Missouri needs to get to 10-2 because of the schedule that they're playing for them to have, a case for an at-large bid into the CFP. And right now, my numbers assign a 31% chance that they get there. So, I mean, a 30% chance to be in that conversation for the CFP. I think most Missouri fans historically would take that. I'm not sure this year. I think the expectations are pretty high. The model wants to see it a little bit before it believes it, putting them at number 15 this year.
Kelley, another one that you've got a few spots higher, and I keep a kind of a composite of a lot of the preseason 1 to 134s, Phil Steele, FPI, and just kind of average them. Kentucky's in that mid 30s range. You've got them at 31, and that's another one I need to dig in some more on some places. But they got an awful lot of old guys on defense. They're getting a former 5-star recruit as a transfer quarterback. I like their receiving room. Kentucky feels like a team to me that maybe could surprise just a little bit. And you've got them a little higher, I think, than the field does too.
Yeah, like you said, number 31. So this is a program that has been pretty remarkably consistent there under Stoops, and I think Stoops has one of the best jobs in college football. But this is a program that really well-rounded. Number 32 on offense, number 31 on defense. Those are the unit projections. The special teams is top 40 as well. I think this is a really sound football team, a really sound football program. It's the number 8 most difficult schedule in the country. So again, you're going to get that from SEC play. Kentucky, like all the teams from the old SEC East, are going to suffer a little bit from the doing away of divisions because that was the easier of the two on a historical perspective. But if you go down the schedule, I mean, the game against Georgia at home in week 3, most people are going to say that's a likely loss. The game on the road at Ole Miss in week 5, most people are going to say that's a likely loss. At Florida, 1-3 chance to win that for Kentucky is what I have right now. At Tennessee, probably most people are going to say that's a likely loss. I have a 21% win expectancy there. And then at Texas in week 13, most people are going to say that's a likely loss. So, there's maybe 4 games on the schedule that you say those are likely losses. There's some other toss-ups there too. 6-6 is the most likely record for me for Kentucky. But 7-5, there's a 42% chance they win at least 7 games. If you look at SEC play, 3 wins is probably most likely. It's not an indictment on Kentucky, like a lot of teams that we could talk about in the SEC. It's because the schedule's so difficult. It's really hard to collect wins, especially in conference play.
Yeah.
So I think if Kentucky goes 7-5, I think that's a pretty darn good year for them. But I do think from a power rating standpoint, like most of the SEC, Kentucky's a really good team. The problem is when you stack them up 1-16 in the SEC, you're in the lower half or maybe even bottom third of those programs. So number 31 in the SEC is not going to lead to the same win total as number 31 power rating would in, say, the ACC.
It's really interesting stuff here. And looking at your projected college football playoff model here, now I'm guessing this is based off your ratings that you have in like the 1 to 134. Like, how did you, first of all, how did you put this college football playoff together?
Yep. So the projected college football playoff bracket that is up on the website at kfordratings.com. That is if I use my power ratings to essentially simulate the season we could see, okay, what is the most likely outcome for every single individual team. So, for example, Georgia, by my numbers, is the favorite to win the SEC, and my model projects them over the course of those 13 games and 12 regular season and the conference championship game to be 12-1. Okay, great. So Georgia's 12-1. Ohio State also 12-1, and you just go down the list. Then I use my most deserving ranking formula to determine, okay, everybody's got these records. How difficult was it to achieve these records based on the schedules played? And that gives me my what I call the objective most deserving, where I can ordinally rank every single team's resume from 1 to 134. Then I apply, of course, what we have adopted as the CFP, seeding format. Top 4 AQs are going to get the bye. The 5th AQ gets in there from the group of 5 in most cases, is where that will come from. And then, of course, the 7 best at larges based on resume. So that's how I filled out this bracket, then use my power ratings to simulate the results of those. And that's how you get what you see there with, for me right now, Georgia winning the national championship over Ohio State. I will update this every single week throughout the year based on the results we actually get and the power rating changes that happen. So I haven't done this in years past with the 4-team era. So I'm curious to see how this projected bracket kind of changes week over week throughout the year.
Kelley, give me a team in the SEC and a team outside of the SEC that are maybe hardest for you to figure. Either maybe you put the stuff in and, hey, that spit out something I didn't see coming, or maybe a variable that you can't adjust for, like, for example, Alabama losing the greatest coach of all time and replacing him with what I think is an elite 1-2. Whatever your reasons are, they don't have to be those. But give me a team in the SEC and a team outside of the SEC that are just really hard for you to figure for whatever reason.
So it's a really good question, Chris. The teams that give me the most that result in the largest uncertainty in their projections are the teams that have experienced the highest amount of turnover, whether that is with the roster, with the coaching staff, or in some cases both. And those are highly correlated now in the transfer portal era as well. So those are the teams that you're looking at where their range of potential outcomes is wider than that of one that has good roster consistency and coaching staff consistency from last year to this year. So, I'll say in the SEC, a team that comes to mind, a highly power rated team that again plays a difficult schedule like most, Texas A&M. That's a team, with Mike Elko coming in year one and just changing kind of the philosophy of how that program is going to be run from the Jimbo Fisher era. So Texas A&M is maybe where I would look in the SEC. And if we're looking outside the SEC, just nationally, I mean, I'm just going to take the cop out and say Colorado, just because of the massive turnover that they have. And I've learned a lot from USC 2 years ago. So the 2022 USC team, the first year under Lincoln Riley, he turned over the whole roster essentially in 1 year. And we got really good learning from how that can work successfully, because that 2022 USC team, from a power rating standpoint, they weren't, necessarily among the elite of the elite. They're top 10, top 15, but not top 5. But their results on the field, they won a lot of close games. Their turnover margin was insanely good. And then we saw some regression in 23 because of those factors. Also, Colorado in 2023 and Deion's first year, we continue to learn about how does it look when you turn over a whole roster. So we've got some good data points on what that looks like now. I'm curious, this 2024 Colorado team is going to be another one that can provide some data there. But I think the range of possibilities for Colorado is pretty wide as well. I think if this team goes bowling, which I think they can, I think that should be celebrated, unfortunately, because of the expectations that have been built up and the hype that's been built up around that program, due in large part to Deion himself and the marketing of Colorado and all that. I'm not sure that nationally or even within that fan base, they will view 6-6 as a successful season or a season to celebrate. But if you look, like this program has not gone bowling frequently in the last 10 plus years. For them to go bowling this year, I think would be another step in a positive direction for Deion. He took over what was number 125 in my power ratings the year before he got there, and it moved them up to 72 last year. Now they're projecting number 43. I think 6-6 is most likely. And again, I know fans aren't probably going to like it because of the hype, but I think that should be a reason to celebrate for Colorado this year. They're a really tough team to project, and I'm excited to get this data point in my data set moving forward.
Looking at your projected schedule difficulty on K4ratings.com, I see the first column here, 1 through 10, and there are 9 SEC schools in here. Georgia Tech there at number 7 out of the ACC. But my goodness, you look up and down these schedules in the SEC, and Florida, you're number 1. We've talked about it. It's brutal. Their schedule, I mean, just it's amazing to see the 9 of the top 10 all from the SEC.
It is amazing. And 15 of the 16 in the SEC are in the top 26. Again, by my numbers, only Missouri is outside of that at number 32, I think I said. So it is incredible. And again, that's due to the fact that so many teams in the SEC are highly power rated. I mean, outside of maybe Vanderbilt, who is not a highly power rated team. And then you could debate, some of those teams in the SEC that are at the lower side of the projected standings, a Mississippi State or in Arkansas, South Carolina. They're not cracking the top 30 of the power ratings, but those teams are sniffing top 40, right? And so when your entire conference, sans one team, is in the top 40 of the power ratings, and then you're going to all play each other, and they only play each other 8 times. Can you imagine if they played 9 against each other? It would be even more inflated, the schedule difficulty. So yes, the most difficult schedules in the country over the course of 12 games reside in the SEC, and that's due in large part to the quality of SEC teams from top to almost bottom, and the fact that they're playing each other 8 times.
Kelley, you touched on some of the difficulties of your model. I think, 10 years ago, you're doing this. I would think that program standard of what they are when you got less player and coach turnovers, a lot more of a constant in what you're doing, probably, or something moving in that direction. What now is the biggest challenge? I think you pointed to turnover, so we've already hit on that. But other than that, what's maybe the biggest difficulty you have putting this together, or the biggest piece of uncertainty, or whatever tag you'd like to put on that?
Yeah, the biggest challenge for me, Chris, is during the summer months or the late winter months, just tracking where players are landing through the transfer portal, because just keeping track of who's actually on what roster, and then also continuing to tweak my scalars or my modifiers of, okay, player X had this amount of production in the SEC last year. Now he's transferring to a MAC school. How much production can we expect out of there? Or vice versa, a really
Yeah.
highly productive player at the MAC level transferring to an SEC school. They're probably not going to have the same level of production, but it's not going to be zero. So how do we modify accounting for the change in difficulty of competition faced year over year? So it's all tied together with turnover, with the roster, with the coaching staff. I'd also like to get, coaching grades, which I have now incorporated into the model. Stability of those coaches, how much they've improved programs, how are they actually in-game decisions. Like, there's different ways to measure all this now, and I just haven't had the opportunity, the time to dedicate the required amount to then back test all the different ideas that I have. So the model has changed over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. I wouldn't say drastically, because it has proven to be pretty successful and pretty accurate, with regard to the absolute air and comparison to the benchmarks that I have in this space. So I don't want to make wholesale changes, but I am constantly evaluating what tweaks can we make to further improve the accuracy, because everything I do from a content standpoint in college football it stems from the power ratings. The power ratings are the
Yeah.
engine for everything else that I'm doing. So if the engine is bad, everything else is going to be unreliable. So I spend a lot of time making sure that model is as good as it can be and continues to kind of be up there with my other benchmarks.
Really good stuff there. Really, really fascinating. I feel like we could sit here and talk about this for hours. But Kelley, really appreciate you coming on and talking through this with us today. Really cool. And everyone can go check out k4ratings.com, and really great stuff there. But Kelley, really appreciate you coming on and talking with us today.
Awesome. Thank you both. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited to see what the SEC looks like here in year 1 of the new 16 member league.
That was Kelley Ford, k4ratings.com. Really good, really interesting stuff there. I feel like we could have spent all day talking with him about that stuff. And interesting where, like we talked about with him, where some teams ended up on his list there. So really good stuff there. Let's move into a little Who Said This, as we'll share a quote from a current or former SEC football coach. We always have a lot of fun with this. And so let's see, Chris, I'll let you go first. What's your quote for this week?
I don't think I've used this one before, and if I have, apologies, but here you go. You can learn more character on the 2-yard line than anywhere else in life. Who said it?
Ooh, that's such a classic coach quote there. I like with so many, I can hear so many coaches saying that. That sounds like a Nick Saban to me. Is that Nick Saban?
Nick Saban once coached at the school of the person who said this. but it does sound like the Nick Saban. That would be my first instinct if I were in your shoes.
So Nick Saban has coached here. Okay. Oh, is that a Les Miles?
No, but you got the right school. And one reason I did it, and I've been a little unfair to you lately, Chase. I've gone in the Wayback Machine and pulled out quotes. But hey, the point of the show is not us, it's the audience. And if you can
Yes.
pull a good quote, even if it's older than us, then you pull the good quote. It's Paul Dietzel. The other reason I pulled it is, boy, has LSU had a quotable family of coaches or what? We had Ed Ogeron, we had Les Miles, we've had Nick Saban. Show you the versatility of LSU coaches. It's not just those guys who can deliver a memorable quote. Paul Dietzel, who was there in the 60s, did it as well.
Yeah, I would not have, my mind would not have gone back that
Yeah.
far, but that was a good one. All right, Chris, who said this? I came to the SEC for a variety of reasons, but the major one in my mind was to win an SEC championship. The reason the SEC is talked about all the time is one team because of their dominance. But I didn't come here to play Alabama. I came here to beat Alabama. You could take Saban's record when he was at Michigan State and when he was a coach in the Big Ten and put it against mine, and he can't compare.
Whoa. Wow. You would have to be bold to say that number one. Really bold.
Yeah.
Which narrows that down considerably. I was thinking Lane Kiffin, but I think Lane Kiffin's deep down smarter than that.
Yeah.
That sounds like Jimbo Fisher.
That is incorrect.
Oh.
That was one Brett Bielema.
What? Oh, no, you're kidding me.
At his first SEC Media Day, he was asked about playing in the tough SEC West. And that's what Brett Bielema had to say.
Funny, that never worked out.
And it never worked out.
For reasons you can kind of tell now in hindsight. Wow.
Yes. So that was Brett Bielema. I saw that and I said, I've got to use that one.
That's tremendous. I don't think I would have gotten that in 10 guesses.
Yeah, I wouldn't have. If you had said that to me, there's no way I would have gotten that either. But yeah, we all know how that worked out. Yeah, so all right, that'll do it for our Who Said This. Let's move to some likely or unlikely. Chris, I'll let you go first. What are your likely or unlikely scenarios?
Okay, well, expansion talks in the air again. We all remember what happened this time 3 ago. So Chase Robinson, likely or unlikely, within 2 years, we're doing this on, what is it, July the 17th of 2026, the SEC will have or will be in the process of adding at least one new team.
You know, I was listening to Greg Sankey the other day, and this was Monday when he was doing this, when he was speaking, and he said, you know, we're 16 today and 16 tomorrow. And I was like, well, what about the day after that and the day after that? You know,
Right.
I'm going to say likely. I think I'm not going to say soon, but relatively soon. It wouldn't surprise me if a couple of names were added. I think they'll go by twos. You know, I think they'll add two. You know, I think they want to keep it at an even number. But I'm going to say likely. I don't know who those teams will be. But I could see that happening in the next couple of years.
Yeah. My guess, I've heard for a while that if the SEC adds teams, I think the two that it likes are Virginia and North Carolina. So take that for what it's worth. My information may be a little bit old, but I'm going to go no and go against the grain. I'll probably be wrong, but
yeah.
Anyway.
And part of me wants to say no. I think they like 16, and I think this is the best 16 teams to be in the SEC. I really do.
Yeah.
And you don't want to go crazy like the Big Ten or you got Rutgers flying out to UCLA. I mean, that makes zero sense. And so I think the SEC, because they're smart, Greg Sankey is extremely smart, that he'll be smart in if he adds anyone. So Yeah, I'm part of me wants to say no, but in this day and age, I mean, I
Yeah,
definitely could see it happening. So that was a
sure.
good one. That was a good one, Chris. So what's your next scenario?
All right. We did a Tennessee preview this week, and as I dug in, I really like this guy. And I want to ask you a question. Dylan Sampson at Tennessee. We will include receiving yards in this, add the rushing yards, so yards from scrimmage. Will he finish in the top 3 in the SEC in yards from scrimmage?
Hmm.
I gave you a little leeway there. I didn't go lead the league. I
Yeah.
just mean top 3.
Top 3. Yeah. Man, that's tough. I feel like there's so many good backs this year.
Mhm.
Um, I think he's definitely going to be up there. I'm going to say unlikely.
Okay.
I think Tennessee's gonna drop a few games.
Yeah.
I don't think they're gonna be quite what we think they are. Um, you mentioned they got a good offensive line though, when we talked about that
Yeah.
earlier, so maybe that'll help Sampson. But I'm gonna go unlikely.
He catches passes, and his yards per touch have been so elite since he's been at Tennessee. He's got less competition for time, I think. Remember 2 years ago, he was splitting time with 2 other guys,
Yeah,
and still per carry was the best back. I think that system lends itself. It feels like as a junior now, he should be getting more of the lion's share of the touches. I mean, I don't think most fans outside of Knoxville could name their backup. To me, it feels like a situation where it's all right for him to pop this year, but we'll see.
yeah, yeah. That was a good one. That was a good one though. So, all right, Chris, likely or unlikely? So the win total for Alabama is 9.3 games. Does Alabama win 10 games? Likely or
Mm.
unlikely?
Is that regular season?
Yes.
Okay. Goodness. Hmm. I'm going to go no on Georgia. I mean, gosh, Georgia was at Wisconsin, at Tennessee, at LSU, at Oklahoma. That feels like it's going to be hard to keep it under 2 losses. I'll go no,
Okay.
but that's a tough one.
That is that, and I was going back and forth when I was writing this down too. I think potentially yes, but I think a lot hangs on like how does this team respond to any coaching staff? Like
Yeah.
what is this? Does Jalen Milroe fit as good as I think he will into Kalen DeBoer's offense? Like, is he consistent? Do they
Yeah.
find some receivers? Does he have people to throw to? Like, I think a lot hangs on that. But yeah, I think 9 is a good. I think 9's a good spot. If
Yeah.
you were betting on them, for sure. So that was my first scenario. All right, likely or unlikely. And I was originally I wrote down um a different part to this, but I changed it. I was gonna say, is Jackson Dart a Heisman finalist? Does he end up in New York? But I scratched that out and I said,
Hmm.
does Jackson Dart win the Heisman?
Oh, no. No, I will take
Okay.
the field to Jackson Dart.
Okay. Do you think he ends
Yeah.
up in New York?
Hmm. Was Eli Manning a finalist?
He finished third.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm just thinking how many Ole Miss guys have even been on the stage. It may be the Manning family or going back a long time. Otherwise, man, you got so many great quarterbacks in this league. Carson Beck's the best guy alone. According to most people, you got Jalen Milroe might have it. I don't know. It just feels like the field might get a little bit too crowded, and I'm pretty sure they're not going to invite 5 SEC quarterbacks to New
Yeah.
York. So I'm going to go no, but would it shock me? Of course not.
Okay. I agree with that because it is he's gonna have to have a very special year. But if he has that special year that I think he could have, I think Ole Miss is going a long way. I think
Yeah.
a lot hangs on him and what he does this year. But yeah, that
Quinn
seems
Ewers being in the league is problematic to that too.
it is, and I think he's a guy that could possibly end up in New York, even with Arch Manning looming in the shadows of Quinn Ewers. I think Quinn Ewers
Yeah.
is that good of a quarterback, and Yeah, this year is going to be so much fun as far as quarterbacks go. I'm so excited to see. There's going to be a lot of fireworks, I think,
Yeah,
offensively this year, Chris.
yeah, I do too. Going to be a fun one.
It will be fun, and we're going to be here all season long to talk about it, to bring it to you here on Southeastern 16. So go ahead and subscribe to our channel and share it with your friends. Let everyone know about Southeastern 16. Like this video, you can comment on it as well. And hey, if you want to sponsor our content, we're always looking for sponsors to help bring you all the great content that we do. We need some sponsors, so you can shoot an email to caroline.smith@southeastern14.com, or you can send me an email as well, chase@southeastern14.com, and we can help set that up and talk to you more about sponsoring our content here. But Chris, always enjoy talking some SEC football, and looking forward to doing it again next week. And of course, on the channel, we have got team previews as we'll be previewing the season for all 16 teams we got up. We've done schedule previews, but this is not the only football content we have. We've got all the season previews going up as well.
Yeah, always fun, Chase. Looking forward to next week.
Absolutely. That'll do it for episode 7 of the SEC Football Hour. That's Chris Lee. I'm Chase Robinson here on Southeastern 16.